Всем привет! В общем, сегодня будет новый выпуск программы TAP Talks about philosophers, разговоры о философах. И сегодня мы будем рассматривать очередного философа эллинистического периода, как он называется, по-моему, так, Hellenic period. То есть это до рождения Христа, Греция там и все такое. И в общем говорить мы будем про Аристотеля. И еще я хотел бы сказать то, что немного сменится формат передачи в ближайшее время, потому что материалы, по которым я работаю, тоже немного изменились. То есть те материалы, которые у меня есть, они на английском языке. Я сейчас себе нашел много материалов, которые на русском языке. И вопрос в том, что как бы у меня эти серии Talks about philosophers, как бы они направлены не только на то, чтобы обозревать и изучать философов там и все остальное, но также на практику языка. Это очевидно. И я думаю, как лучше изменить формат, потому что я заметил то, что все-таки двухчасовой формат, он достаточно большой. Хотя, в принципе, 2 часа это не так-то много, учитывая, какие могут быть, какие есть вообще видео, какой есть контент вообще там в сети и так далее. Давайте приступим к делу. Let's dig in. Let's start. Let's start with our episode. So basically we're overviewing Aristotle, and the words that we have here, the vocabulary. Usually we overview the vocabulary, and I'm again and again saying that I'm using 2 dictionaries, which is word web, to have an explanation of a word without translation, and lingua for interpretation or translation of the word into Russian. Basically words that we have here: treatise, formal piece of writing. Rational, sensible and following reason. Sensible and following reason can describe a person or a person's actions. Антоним irrational. Rational or irrational, рациональный, это понятно. Hierarchies, system of people or things ranked one above the other. Bridle, a piece of equipment used to direct a horse. Infinite, unlimited or unmeasurable, opposite of finite. Eudaimonia, a Greek word which translates to mean happiness, welfare, or human flourishing. It is the state of being happy, healthy, and prosperous. Flourish, to be successful and prosperous. Prosperous, used to describe a successful or favorable situation. Tranquility, calmness, serenity without stress. Platitudinous, used to describe a meaningless statement. Platitudinous, used to describe a meaningless statement. Platitudinous, интересное слово, interesting word. Ergon, function, task or work. Arete, the excellence of someone or something. For example, the arete of a knife is its sharpness. То есть самая основная, самая важная характеристика чего-либо. То есть, например, у ножа это лезвие, острость, острие. Острота, ебать, пиздец. Traits, distinguishing characteristics or qualities of a person or a thing. Mean, something that is a midway between 2 points. Pretty much this set of words is not so much complicated. It's how some people would say it's self-explanatory. However, there are interesting words here, and anyways, interesting to see, to look in which kind of context they are used. So basically, let's start. Aristotle, 384 and 322 BC, before Christ. So he was born pretty much 4 centuries before Christ. He was a student of Plato and teacher of Alexander the Great. Okay, his work on ethics, he was a teacher of Alexander the Great. His work on ethics is best seen in the context of the Socratic and Platonic ethics which preceded him. Okay, so his work is best seen in the context of the Socratic and Platonic ethics which preceded him. So Socrates and Plato preceded Aristotle, because he was a student of Plato, and so his influencers, as how it's usually said nowadays, are Socrates and Plato. Plato was an idealistic and utopian thinker. Aristotle was more realistic and pragmatic. Recall that Plato envisioned a perfectly just state, the republic, and imagined what it is for an individual person to be perfectly just by analogy with it. Perfectly just by analogy with it, by analogy with the state. I remember how it's described, the vision of Plato of the megapolis or ideal city, where it's all described in the video about Plato that it is on my channel, okay, Aristotle, on the other hand, tries to articulate what it is that people ultimately search for in life. He goes on to develop a rich philosophical account of this life and the obstacles we experience in trying to live it. That's what Aristotle. Okay. Aristotle, on the other hand, that's who we're reading it about. Aristotle, on the other hand, tries to articulate what it is that people ultimately search for in life. So Aristotle looks after what people search in life. He searches for something, pretty much what people look after. He goes on to develop a rich philosophical account of this life and the obstacles of experience in trying to live it. So it's a rich philosophical account. Recall also that Socrates believed that virtue is knowledge. If you know what is good or right, you will automatically do what is good or right. Aristotle denies this automatic link between knowledge and virtue. To be virtuous is to have a good character, and there is more to this than knowing what is good. To be virtuous is to have a good character, and there is more to this than knowing what is good. Good character. A virtuous person must have the right emotional temperament, as well as knowledge and wisdom. Okay, so he describes a virtuous person. So what goes next? 2 major works on ethics by Aristotle survive. The Nicomachean Ethics, perhaps dictated to his son Nicomachus. Okay, so he had a son whose name was Nicomachus, and this is called the Nicomachean Ethics, and the Eudemian Ethics, Eudemian Ethics. The Nicomachean Ethics has been the more influential of the two. Indeed, it ranks as perhaps the most influential single text in the history of ethics, and it is this text that we examine in this lecture. Full versions of the text are readily available on electronic version. Okay, but I see that I'm not gonna delete that, but anyway, sorry about that. Aristotle begins his treatise on ethics. Just 1 second. Okay. So Aristotle begins his treatise on ethics, the Nicomachean Ethics, with a deceptively simple statement. Deceptively simple statement. So what that may mean that some things are so simple that they can be deceptive. Let's have a look at this word. What does that mean? Because I thought about the word deceit. Deceive, which means to lie. Deceptively, in a misleading way. So it's pretty much the same thing what I thought. So things are sometimes simple and they are deceptive. Every skill and every inquiry, and similarly every action and rational choice is thought to aim at some good. Every skill and every inquiry, and similarly every action and rational choice is thought to aim at some good, and so the good has been aptly described as that at which everything aims. And good is described as that at which everything aims. So good is something at what people are aiming. It's very interesting because people aim at something and it is a final result. So they may have their target or something, and you may think that it is good, but how people reach this target is doubtful and questioned, because not all the people actually reach their targets and reach their aims by good means. So it's interesting what it's gonna say about that. Let's have a look at word aptly. В притирку без зазора в пору has been aptly described. Okay, я понял. Anyways, all actions aim at something. If you are doing something completely aimless, for example daydreaming, this won't count as an action for Aristotle. Actions are things we do for a purpose. Another way of putting this is to say that all actions aim at some end. Aristotle holds that the end of or purpose of our actions is always to achieve some perceived good. Okay, Aristotle holds that the end of or purpose of our actions is always to achieve some perceived good. Okay, Aristotle then describes a hierarchy of ends. Some ends are subordinate to others. Bridle, that's the word. Sorry. Horse riding thing, bridles. Bridle making has its end making bridles, but the making of bridles is subordinate to horsemanship in general, because we make bridles to facilitate the riding of horses. We do not ride horses in order to facilitate the making of bridles. Yes, but I think some things are done in this way, so pretty much in reverse, how it's explained here. And horsemanship is subordinate to military science, because we ride horses in order to achieve a victory in battle, as the Greeks would have it. We do not seek victory in battle in order to have an excuse to ride horses. Aristotle takes this hierarchy of ends and the sciences and arts that facilitate their attainment to be pervasive. Aristotle takes this hierarchy of ends and the sciences and arts that facilitate their attainment to be pervasive. All human ends fit in the hierarchy somewhere. Aristotle also makes a common sense distinction between ends and ends that are valued instrumentally, for example surgery, and ends that are also valued for their own sake. Okay. Aristotle next argues that there must be an ultimate end or supreme good to which we aim. Supreme good is something that is described in some of the videos that I recorded before. I think maybe it's about Epicurus, because it's about karma. I don't remember how much about karma it is, but the thing is that it's said that there is a supreme good in the end of our life, and all the things that we do balance it. So you do bad stuff, you are not getting big supreme good in the end of your life after you die or something. But if you do good things, this supreme good, I'm not telling it's becoming bigger and bigger or something. It's the thing is that you will reach this goodness after your death. If you haven't done enough good things in life, or you have done so many bad things in your life, you will again go through the circle of life. That's why they have this how Indians say about it, you know it. So how people live one life after another, and after another, and as long as you become completely ideal in your karma, that's when you're gonna reach this aim, as how it's said here. But here it says that Aristotle argues that there must be an ultimate end or supreme good to which we aim. This is an end at the top of the hierarchies of ends. An ultimate end is one that is valued for its own sake. An ultimate end is one that is valued for its own sake and is not valued for the sake of anything else. It is something complete and sufficient, not lacking any good. Every other end is valued ultimately for the sake of this supreme good. Here is Aristotle's argument. So this is a translation of the book, which is dated like 10th, 11th century. So if what is done has some end and we want for its own sake, and everything else we want is for the sake of this end, and if we do not choose everything for the sake of something else, because this would lead to an infinite progression, making our desire fruitless and vain, then clearly this will be the good, indeed the chief good. But it's a bit complicated. So what is done has some end that we want. So if what is done has some end that we want for its own sake, and everything else we want is for the sake of this end, and if we do not choose everything for the sake of something else, because this would lead to an infinite progression making our desire fruitless and vain, then clearly this will be the good, indeed the chief good. So has some end and that we want for its own sake. Okay, so he divides it. He says that the ultimate good that is in the end of all goods, of all aims, the ultimate aim, we want it for the sake of it, but all the rest goods we want for the sake of something else. So basically, if there is something what we want just for the sake of itself, so basically this is the only one thing which is the main supreme good. Okay, I understand. The key argument occurs in the middle of the sentence. Suppose we value one thing for the sake of another, and that for the sake of yet another, and that for the sake of yet another, and so on forever. Aristotle claims our desire would be fruitless and vain. In example, empty. There must be one ultimate goal in our lives, and if we achieve this goal, all our other endeavors won't have been in vain. Aristotle can't prove that there is only one such goal. However, I think that yes, you may have one supreme good or supreme aim that you are aiming to reach, for instance, in the end of your life. However, it doesn't mean that all of the endeavors that you have are aimed at this thing. Still, something is aimed just because it happens, or just because you done it and that's it, it's done. And what's next? Endeavors won't have been in vain. Aristotle can't prove that there is only one such goal. His argument isn't strong enough to show this. Yeah, so what it makes me think about is that it's kind of about some person's life and person's satisfaction by the whole his life. Has this person done enough good, or has this person reached the ultimate goal of his life, or the ultimate target or aim of his life? So basically here he says, if you reach this ultimate goal in life, then everything that you have done is not useless, is not aimless. So pretty much and this becomes how would you say, how to say it, this becomes irritation. The closer you reach the end of your life, the more irritated you become, and the more you think about how useful or useless your life is. Show this. But he thinks there is only one such goal. Okay, so Aristotle can't prove that there is only one such goal. His argument isn't strong enough to show this, but he thinks there is only one such goal. That is, he thinks there is one common supreme good for human beings. He thinks there is one common supreme good for human beings. He thinks this probably because he thinks human beings are fundamentally alike. We are all members of the one species. He also believes that he has a clear and obvious candidate for the one supreme good of human life. Okay. Eudaimonia, according to Aristotle, the one ultimate end of all rational human endeavors is happiness. More strictly, we should use the Greek word eudaimonia to describe this ultimate end. Happiness is close in meaning to eudaimonia, but the translation is not precise. The sense of the term happiness that is closest to the meaning of eudaimonia is that of a happy life. This sense of happiness is brought out when we say of a couple that they have a happy marriage. This sense of happiness is brought out when we say of a couple that they have a happy marriage. So in Indian in some of Indian philosophers or I don't remember, probably it's from India. Yeah, it's from India. It's called nirvana. When you reach this state of calamity, tranquility, and maybe happiness is there. So this is the ultimate goal there, as far as I know. Eudaimonia is not a temporary mental state like pleasure, joy, bliss, or tranquility. Eudaimonia is an overall condition of a person's life. Indeed, Aristotle thinks that we can't be sure that a person has lived a eudaimonic life until it is over. And even then, the eudaimonic character of a life can be ruined by bad luck. For example, if your children disgrace your family name. Eudaimonia is the supreme good for human beings because it is the ultimate end for which we pursue anything. Eudaimonia is the supreme good for human beings because it is the ultimate end for which we pursue anything. It is unconditionally complete. We don't seek our ultimate happiness for the sake of anything else, and it is self-sufficient. We don't say of a happy life that it lacks something, though of course we could always say of a life that it could be more happy. Так, wait a second. It is self-sufficient. We don't say of a happy life that it lacks something, though of course we could always say of a life that it could be more happy. Aristotle develops his own account of human happiness in terms of his account of human nature. Everything has a natural ergon, or characteristic activity. Ergon, I remember what that is. It's about the knife. Нет, arete. Arete is about the knife. Ergon, what's ergon? Ergon. Так, wait. Who the fuck knows what that is? I'm not sure. Everything has its natural ergon, or characteristic activity. It's right. So, arete, the excellence of something or something. For example, the arete of a knife is a sharpness. Ergon, function, task, work. Ergon, okay. Characteristic activity. For example, the ergon of a lion seems to be to mate with other lions to produce future generations of lions, raise cubs to such and such an age of female, and so on. Aristotle contends that human happiness is to be discovered by discovering the characteristic activity ergon of human beings. Okay, so it's to find our ergon. But perhaps saying that happiness is the chief good sounds rather platitudinous. Dull and tiresome, but with pretensions of significance or originality. Platitudinous, так, is the chief good sounds rather platitudinous, and one might want its nature to be specified still more clearly. It is possible that we might achieve that if we grasp the characteristic activity ergon of a human being, for just as the good, the doing well of of a flute player, a sculptor, or any practitioner of a skill, or generally whatever has some characteristic, activity, or action, is thought to lie in its characteristic activity. So the same would seem to be true of a human being, if indeed he has a characteristic activity. But how complicated is this thing? But I pretty much understood. So for just as the good, the doing well of a flute player, a sculptor, or any practitioner of a skill, or generally whatever has some characteristic activity or action, is thought to lie in its characteristic activity. So the same would seem to be true of a human being. It means that maybe during life people find out their characteristic activities and they become kind of oriented. So they know that they know their characteristic activity and they do good according to what they know. So the characteristic activity of human beings is to use reason. Our capacity to reason and everything that follows from it, including language, technology, and culture, are what distinguishes us from all other species. It is what makes us special. Thus, thinks Aristotle, it is also the key to making us ultimately happy in the eudaimonic sense. We live happy or well only when we use reason with great skill. The use of reason with great skill is virtuous activity. Thus, Aristotle holds that a happy life is one lived virtuously. This sounds rather similar to Socrates and Plato's views. Virtue is its own ultimate reward, but there are a couple of caveats which make Aristotle's view more worldly than either Socratic or Platonic views. Make the view more worldly. First, virtuous activity is accompanied by pleasure. Okay, so this is a big abstract from the book. So what it says is, it is also the case that the life of virtuous people is pleasurable in itself. For experiencing pleasure is an aspect of the soul, and each person finds pleasure in that of which he is said to be fond, as a horse lover finds it in a horse, and someone who likes wonderful sights finds it in a wonderful sight. In the same way, a lover of justice finds it in the sphere of justice, and in general a person with virtue finds pleasure in what accords with virtue. The pleasures of the masses, because they are not pleasant by nature, conflict with one another. It depends on what kind of masses, actually, though. The pleasures of the masses, because they are not pleasant by nature, conflict with one another. But the pleasure of those who are fond of noble things are pleasant by nature, are fond of noble things. Actions in accordance with virtue are like this, so that they are pleasant to these people as well as in themselves. Their life therefore has no need of pleasure as some kind of lucky ornament, but contains its pleasure in itself, because in addition to what we have already said, the person who does not enjoy noble actions is not good. For no one would call a person just if he did not enjoy acting justly, or generous if he did not enjoy generous actions, and the same goes for the other virtues. If this is so, it follows that actions in accordance with virtue are pleasant in themselves. Okay, блять, I'm not gonna describe it again or describe it. What it says here is pretty much understandable, and it's interesting, but still it's not, it doesn't have it doesn't say anything about the ultimate supreme good in the end of your life. It says about experiencing pleasure in the life of people. The fact that people experience pleasure from different things, and this is what makes life self-containing pleasure. It says that if your life is full of something that you do with pleasure, you don't need to experience pleasure, because you do things and your life is full of pleasure itself, because you are such person who experiences pleasure from doing those things, but you are not actually experiencing it, you are doing it, and that's why your life is full of pleasure. It follows that actions in accordance with virtue are pleasant in themselves. It also tells something about virtue, but anyways, it's a long abstract. I'm not gonna go through it again. Actually, I can. So okay, let's do it. It is also the case that the life of virtuous people is pleasurable in itself. It's pleasurable in itself. For experiencing pleasure is an aspect of the soul, and each person finds pleasure in that of which he is said to be fond. Okay. As a horse lover finds it in a horse, and someone who likes wonderful sights finds it in a wonderful sight, in the same way a lover of justice finds it in the sphere of justice, and in general a person with virtue finds pleasure in what accords with virtue. Добродетель. Okay. The pleasure of the masses, because they are not pleasant by nature, conflict with one another. But the pleasures of those who are fond of noble things are pleasant by nature. Why but? Okay, actions in accordance with virtue are like this, so that they are pleasant to these people as well as in themselves. Actions in accordance with virtue are like this, so that they are pleasant to these people as well as in themselves. Their life therefore has no need of pleasure as some kind of lucky ornament, but contains its pleasure in itself, because in addition to what we have already said, the person who does not enjoy noble actions is not good. For no one would call a person just if he did not enjoy acting justly, or generous if he did not enjoy generous actions. And the same goes for the other virtues. Okay, so pretty much what I can tell about that is that it means that if you are some certain kind of person, you will probably do something what you are sincere about. If you are sincere about what you do, then you will have then you will have a pleasurable life, and it's gonna be pleasurable itself. You won't even think that you are getting pleasure from what you're doing, because it's sincere and you are this type of person. Anyways, I understand what it says here, however I don't understand why it said that the pleasure of the masses, because they are not pleasant by nature, conflict with one another. So it's interesting. I understand that it's difficult to sum up the whole world, or kind of make one clear point to all the people on the planet, like make the one certain thing for them, which will be their main characteristic. But I think it's doable, and actually I don't understand why it actually anyways says it about the masses of people here, because if you remove this from here, it's not gonna lose its sense. It's gonna have the same sense that it has. Anyway, secondly, happiness is not made identical to acting virtuously. Come what may, even when acting virtuously is pleasant. It also requires external goods such as health, beauty, good children, good birth. Okay. Nevertheless, as we suggested, happiness obviously needs the presence of external goods as well, since it is impossible, or at least no easy matter, to perform noble actions without resources. For in many actions we employ as if they were instruments at our disposal, friends, wealth, and political power. Again, being deprived of some things, such as high birth, noble children, beauty, spoils our blessedness. For the person who is terribly ugly, of low birth, or solitary and childless is not really the sort to be happy, still less perhaps if he had children or friends who are thoroughly bad or goodbye dead. As we have said, then there seems to be an additional need for some sort of prosperity like this. For this reason, some identify happiness with good fortune, while others identify it with virtue. But just a second. So let's run through this again. Nevertheless, as we suggested, happiness obviously needs the presence of external goods as well, since it is impossible, or at least no easy matter, to perform noble actions without resources. For in many actions we employ, as if they were instruments at our disposal, friends, wealth, and political power. Again, being deprived of some things, such as high birth, noble children, beauty, spoils our blessedness. For the person who is terribly ugly, of low birth, or solitary and childless, is not really the sort to be happy, still less perhaps if he has children or friends who are thoughtfully bad or good but dead. As we have said, then, there seems to be an additional need for some sort of prosperity like this. For this reason, some identify happiness with good fortune, while others identify it with virtue. Okay, I know I understand it a bit more, but I'm not going to run through it a third time. Aristotle also claims that what happens after one's death can affect one's happiness. For instance, terrible disgrace brought about by one's children. This demonstrates how far Aristotle is from identifying happiness with a kind of mental state, or indeed a function of mental states. Virtues. Aristotle's account of the virtues is the most developed in Greek philosophy. He takes virtues to be states of character, states that issue in disposition to behave. He takes virtues to be states of character, states that issue in dispositions to behave in certain appropriate ways. Experience appropriate emotions, perceive situations, and think matters through in appropriate ways, etc. He divides virtues into virtues of character, sometimes called the moral virtues, and virtues of reason, sometimes called the intellectual virtues. Virtues of character involve mastering your emotions in accordance with reason. Virtues of reason involve excellence of reason. Okay. Excellence of reason. Virtues of character include such things as courage, temperance, generosity, even temperedness, magnanimity, великодушие, благородство, magnanimity. Each is associated with a particular feeling or a particular type of action. Courage, fear; temperance, pleasure and pain; magnanimity, giving of large donations or gifts. Aristotle's primary account of them is given in terms of his doctrine of the golden mean, sometimes also known as the via media or middle way. According to the doctrine of the golden mean, virtues lie between excess and deficiency. Excess and deficiency. Okay, so virtues lie between excess is too much and deficiency, which is lack of it. So I understand it's a bit complicated, but what makes it complicated is the abstracts from the books. You can have a look at the books that are 1,000-year-old, and they are kind of very difficult to understand. So here it's interpretation at least, but still it's complicated. So what does it say about virtues that are found between excess and deficiency? First, then, let us consider this. The fact that states like this are naturally corrupted by deficiency and excess, as we see in the cases of strength and health, we must use clear examples to illustrate the unclear. For both too much exercise and too little ruin one's strength, and likewise too much food and drink and too little ruin one's health, while the right amount produces increase and preserve it. So golden mean, it said golden mean, which is золотая середина. The same goes then for temperance, courage, and the other virtues. The person who avoids and fears everything, never standing his ground, becomes cowardly, while he who fears nothing but confronts every danger becomes rash. So the same goes then for temperance, courage, and other virtues. The person who avoids and fears everything, never standing his ground, becomes cowardly. While he who fears nothing but confronts every danger becomes rash. Понятно. In the same way, the person who enjoys every pleasure and never restrains himself becomes intemperate, while he who avoids all pleasure, as boors do, while he who avoids all pleasure becomes as it were insensible. Temperance and courage then are ruined by excess and deficiency, and presence preserved by the mean. Okay, it is important to know that Aristotle's doctrine of the mean is not recommending moderation in all things. Virtue may require great feeling, anger, or generosity. For instance, the mean is not an arithmetical measure, but varies from circumstance to circumstance and agent to agent. I'm talking here about virtue of character, since it is this that is concerned with feelings and actions, and it is in this that we find excess, deficiency, and the mean. For example, fear, confidence, appetite, anger, pity, and in general pleasure and pain can be experienced too much or too little, and in both ways not well. But to have them at the right time, about the right things, towards the right people, for the right end, and in the right way, is the mean and the best, and this is the business of virtue. Okay, so the thing is about golden middle, golden mean, which means that you should have pretty much everything, but in certain conditions to the right, or at the right time, at the right place, and at the right amount, not too much, not too less, but basically that is what makes it perfect. So recall that virtue requires pleasure, This is important for Aristotle, for he realizes that a happy life is a pleasant one. A person truly acts from virtue when they do so willingly, knowingly, and taking pleasure in the action. Thus, a person does not truly exemplify the virtue of courage if they act bravely and yet terrified, hating every moment of it. And a person does not exemplify generosity if they give their money away resentfully. Okay, how are virtues of character taught? By habitation. One develops a virtue by acting out the virtue, copying one's betters, eventually coming to understand and take pleasure in the exercise of virtue. Moral education is thus not even primarily an intellectual matter. Notice how far Aristotle has come from Socrates' view that all you needed for virtue is the right knowledge. Okay, so I think it's an interesting explanation or description of Aristotle's views and teachings. Of course, it doesn't cover everything what Aristotle said, and I think maybe in next video I will try to compare what I have about Aristotle from other resources, because next video, maybe next 2 or 3 videos are gonna be in the same format, but further on there will be videos in another format and from another resources. So basically I will have a look at what those resources say about Aristotle and these pleasures and virtues and characteristic of like primarily characteristic of person that makes them perfect and makes their life pleasurable. I will have a look at what it tells about that, and in the video it's going to be described. It's going to be described in the video. But here I would like to also say thanks for the views, for the comments, for the likes, and for the subscriptions. I'm glad if you do that. Also, you are welcome to watch other videos on my channel. I have some videos about games, music, and talks about philosophers, and pretty much if you I hope you will enjoy other videos on my channel as well. So peace to all. See you, no worries.